The Arizona territory stretched endless beneath a sky the color of burnt copper. Sarah Whitfield squinted against the afternoon glare, her gloved hands gripping the reins of her mule with the determination of someone who had no other choice but to keep moving forward. The wagon wheels groaned in protest with each rotation, kicking up small clouds of dust that settled on everything: her faded blue dress, the canvas covering her meager possessions, even the wisps of auburn hair that had escaped from beneath her bonnet. It had been 3 days since she had left Fort Buchanan, 3 days of nothing but sagebrush, cacti, and the occasional glimpse of a roadrunner darting across the trail. The letter in her pocket promised work at the Copper Queen mine near Bisbee, washing clothes for the miners, mending their shirts, perhaps cooking if they'd have her. It wasn't much, but for a widow with empty pockets and nowhere else to go, it was hope. Sarah shifted on the hard wooden seat, wincing at the ache in her back. The sun was beginning its descent toward the red rocks in the distance, painting shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the desert floor. She knew she should find a place to camp soon, but something made her push on. Maybe it was the memory of the station master's warning back at the last stop. Apache country. Ma'am, they've been restless since the army started pushing them onto reservations. A woman alone. He'd shaken his head, leaving the sentence unfinished. The mule, a stubborn creature she'd named Moses for his supposed ability to lead her to the promised land, suddenly stopped. His ears swiveled forward, then back, nostrils flaring. "Come on, Moses," Sarah urged, flicking the reins. "Just a little further." But Moses wouldn't budge. Instead, he let out a nervous bray that echoed off the canyon walls. That's when she heard it, the thunder of hooves, coming fast from the cluster of mesquite trees to her right. Her heart hammered against her ribs as 3 riders burst into view, bandanas pulled up over their faces, rifles glinting in the dying light. "Well, well," the lead rider called out, his voice rough as sandpaper. "What have we here, a lady traveling all alone?" Sarah's mouth went dry. She reached slowly for the old Navy Colt her late husband had taught her to shoot, but her fingers trembled too badly to grip it properly. The riders circled her wagon like vultures, their laughter harsh and predatory. One of them, a man with pale eyes that reminded her of a rattlesnake, dismounted and approached. "Now don't be unfriendly. Miss, we're just looking for a little hospitality." His companions laughed at this, an ugly sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. "I have nothing of value," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, I wouldn't say that," Snake Eyes replied, reaching for her arm. The crack of a rifle shot split the air. Snake Eyes jerked back, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. Another shot followed immediately, and the second rider toppled from his horse with a cry. The remaining bandit wheeled his mount around, searching wildly for the source of the gunfire. A figure emerged from behind a large boulder, a man moving with the fluid grace of someone born to this harsh land. His long black hair was held back by a strip of cloth, and his clothing was a mixture of Apache and Mexican styles. He held a Winchester rifle with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. "Leave," he said simply, his voice carrying despite its quiet tone. "Now." The wounded Snake Eyes scrambled back onto his horse, cursing. "Filthy Apache!" he spat, but fear had replaced bravado in his voice. The 3 men fled, leaving dust and the echo of hoofbeats in their wake. Sarah sat frozen, unsure whether she'd traded one danger for another. The Apache warrior, for that's surely what he was, approached slowly, his rifle now pointed at the ground. In the fading light, she could see his face more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 summers, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of dark amber. "You are hurt?" he asked in accented but clear English. Sarah shook her head, not trusting her voice. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the sun sinking behind the mountains. "This is no place to camp. There is water and shelter 2 miles north. I will show you." I don't..." Sarah began, her mother's warnings about Indians ringing in her ears. But what choice did she have? Night was falling, and those men might return with reinforcements. The Apache seemed to read her hesitation. "I am called Nawel," he said. "I served as a scout for the Bluecoats during the war between your people. I am not your enemy." Something in his voice, a weariness, perhaps, or a hidden sadness, made Sarah's fear ebb slightly. "Sarah Whitfield," she heard herself say, "and I thank you." Nahuel nodded once and turned to walk ahead of her wagon, his movements sure despite the gathering darkness. As Moses finally consented to follow, Sarah couldn't help but study her unexpected savior. His clothing showed signs of careful mending, and she noticed he wore boots rather than moccasins, a sign of someone caught between two worlds. They traveled in silence, the only sounds the creaking of wagon wheels and the distant howl of a coyote. True to his word, after about half an hour, Nawel led her to a small grove of cottonwood trees clustered around a spring. The water bubbled up clear and cold from the rocks, a small miracle in this dry land. "You will be safe here," he said, already turning to leave. "Wait," Sarah called out before she could stop herself. "Where will you—" He gestured vaguely toward the darkness. "I know this land. But those men, they might come back. You're wounded, aren't you? I saw blood on your shirt." Nahuel glanced down at his left side where, indeed, a dark stain had spread across the fabric. "It is nothing." "It's not nothing," Sarah said, surprising herself with her firmness. "I may not be a doctor, but I know how to clean and dress a wound. It's the least I can do." He hesitated, clearly torn between accepting help and maintaining distance. Finally, practicality won. He moved into the circle of light cast by the small fire she'd managed to build and sat down on a flat rock. Sarah fetched her medical supplies, precious few as they were, and a pot of water she'd heated. When Nahuel removed his shirt, she saw the bullet had grazed his ribs, leaving a furrow that bled steadily but wasn't deep. "You're lucky," she murmured, cleaning the wound with practiced movements. Her husband had come home from more than one drunken brawl needing such attention. "Lucky," Nahuel repeated, an odd note in his voice. "Yes, very lucky." As she worked, Sarah noticed other scars on his bronze skin, some old and faded, others more recent. Each one told a story of violence, of survival in a world that seemed determined to destroy him. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. Nahuel was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, once, someone helped my sister when she traveled alone. She did not survive anyway, but the kindness mattered. Sarah's hands stilled for a moment before she continued wrapping the bandage. "I'm sorry." "It was many seasons ago," he said, but the pain in his voice suggested otherwise. When she finished, Nahuel stood and pulled his shirt back on. "I will keep watch tonight, sleep without fear." "You don't have to—" "I do," he interrupted gently. "Those men, they will remember my face. It is better if I know where they are." Sarah wanted to protest, but exhaustion was already pulling at her. She climbed into the back of her wagon, wrapping herself in her thin blanket, through a gap in the canvas. She could see Nahuel's silhouette against the star-filled sky, standing guard like some ancient sentinel, as sleep finally claimed her. Sarah's last thought was how strange it was that she felt safer with this Apache stranger than she had in months, in this harsh land where civilization was just a thin veneer over violence. Perhaps the old rules no longer applied. Perhaps out here, in the wind and sand of the high plains, people were just people, all trying to survive another day. The desert night wrapped around them, filled with the songs of insects and the whisper of wind through cottonwood leaves. And somewhere in the darkness, a warrior kept watch over a widow's dreams, both of them outcasts in a land that had no mercy for the weak or the different. Chapter 2. The woman pushed to the margins, ****. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Sarah woke to find Nahuel gone. Only the faint impression in the sand where he'd stood watch and a handful of mesquite beans left by the water barrel proved he'd been there at all. She touched the beans thoughtfully, food for the road ahead, left without word or expectation of thanks, as she prepared Moses for the day's journey. Sarah's mind drifted to another morning 2 years past. She'd woken then to find her husband Thomas cold beside her, his heart having given out in the night after too many years of whiskey and bitterness. The doctor said it was quick, merciful even, but there had been no mercy in what followed. Barren woman. Her mother-in-law, Constance Whitfield, had spat at the funeral. 7 years married and not a single child to carry on the Whitfield name. What use are you now? The memories came flooding back as Sarah guided her wagon toward Bisbee. Thomas's brother, Edward, circling like a buzzard, suggesting she might earn her keep in ways that made her skin crawl. The family lawyer explaining that the house, the small savings, everything belonged to the Whitfield family trust. You understand, Mrs. Whitfield. Without children, you have no legal claim. She'd left with what she could carry and the old wagon Thomas had won in a card game. Pride had kept her from begging, but pride didn't fill an empty stomach or pay for a room on cold nights. The town of Bisbee appeared by midday, a collection of wooden buildings and tents clustered around the gaping wound of the copper mine. The air tasted of metal and sulfur, and the streets teemed with men, miners covered in red dust, merchants hawking their wares, and the inevitable gamblers and confidence men that followed money like flies to honey. Sarah stopped at the general store, clutching the letter from Mr. Josiah Pemberton, the mine superintendent who'd advertised for a laundress. Pemberton, the store clerk, a thin man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down. He ain't here no more. Got himself killed in a cave-in 3 weeks back. Sarah's heart sank. But, is there someone else I could speak to about work? The clerk's laugh was unkind. Lady, we got a dozen women already fighting over the washing, unless you're looking for work at the Crimson Bell. He gestured toward a garishly painted building down the street where women in bright dresses lounged on the porch. No, Sarah said quickly. No, thank you. She spent the rest of the day going from business to business, each rejection chipping away at her resolve. The boarding houses wouldn't rent to a woman alone. The restaurant had just hired someone. Even the church turned her away, the minister's wife explaining that they couldn't encourage women of uncertain reputation. As evening approached, Sarah found herself at the edge of town, tears threatening to spill. She'd used the last of her money on feed for Moses. Tomorrow, she'd have to make a choice. Sell the mule and wagon, her last connection to independence, or... You were with that Apache. Sarah spun around to find a man in a dusty black coat watching her. He wore a sheriff's star, and his face had the hard look of someone who'd seen too much and trusted too little. I beg your pardon. This morning, early, someone saw an Apache near your wagon when you came in. Sheriff Dawson stepped closer, tobacco juice staining his gray mustache. You know it's illegal to harbor hostiles. He saved my life, Sarah said, lifting her chin. Bandits attacked me on the road. That's so. Dawson's smile was cold. Funny how them Apache always seem to show up right when there's trouble. Almost like they're working together, if you catch my meaning. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. That's absurd. He fought them off, was wounded. Ma'am, Dawson interrupted. I'm going to give you some advice. This is a respectable town. We don't cut into Indian lovers here. You'd best move along come morning. He touched the brim of his hat mockingly and walked away, leaving Sarah shaking with anger and fear, as if her day hadn't been humiliating enough. She camped outside town that night, too proud to beg for shelter and too poor to pay for it. As she sat by her small fire, Sarah laughed bitterly. Here she was, pushed to the margins by everyone, too barren for the Whitfields, too poor for Bisbee, and now too tainted by association with an Apache who'd done nothing but show her kindness. A sound in the darkness made her reach for Thomas's old pistol. But it was Nahuel who stepped into the firelight, moving with that same quiet grace. "You should not camp here," he said without preamble. "The men from yesterday, they are in town, talking to others. They speak of the woman who travels with an Apache." Sarah's shoulders sagged. "It doesn't matter. I have nowhere else to go." Nahuel studied her for a long moment, then sat across from her, maintaining a careful distance. "You seek work?" She nodded, too tired to maintain any pretense. "I'm a widow. My husband's family. They wanted nothing to do with me, said I was worthless without children, without property. I thought I could start over here, but—" She gestured helplessly toward the town. "Ah!" The single sound held understanding. "You are pushed to the edges, like me." "You?" Sarah looked at him curiously. "But you said you scouted for the army." His smile was bitter. "Yes, I fought for the Bluecoats, helped them track my own people. They promised citizenship, respect. Instead—" He pulled back his hair to reveal a scar along his scalp. "The soldiers I saved turned on me when the war ended. Said an Apache is always an Apache, never to be trusted. But your own people? Call me traitor. Say I have the blood of our warriors on my hands." Nahuel poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I am neither Apache nor American. I am nothing." They sat in silence, two outcasts sharing the warmth of a dying fire. "Finally," Sarah asked, "how do you survive?" "I hunt. I guide when someone will hire me. I know places where a man can find gold, trade routes the Mexicans use." He paused. "I survive because I must, as do you." Sarah thought about the crimson bell, about the women on the porch with their painted faces and hollow eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if survival is worth the cost." "It is," Nahuel said firmly. "Every sunrise is a victory against those who would see us erased." Something in his voice, fierce and determined, stirred an ember of hope in Sarah's chest. "The sheriff told me to leave town by morning. Then we leave." Nahuel stood. Decision made. "There is a trading post 3 days north. The man who runs it, Rodrigo. He cares nothing for skin color or past, only for fair trade. You could find work there." Sarah stood too, confused. "But why would you—" "Those men will follow you. They have pride, and I wounded it along with their bodies. You would not reach the trading post alone." Sarah wanted to protest, to maintain some shred of independence. But pragmatism won. "I can't pay you." "I did not ask for payment." Nahuel was already moving to check her wagon, testing wheels and axles with experienced hands. "We leave before dawn. Sleep now." As Sarah settled into her bedroll, she watched him take up his post again, rifle across his knees. How strange, she thought, that the only person in this harsh land who'd shown her genuine kindness was the very one society said she should fear most. Her last thought before sleep took her was of Constance Whitfield's voice, worthless. Maybe by the standards of that world? She was, but out here, where survival itself was an act of rebellion, perhaps worth was measured differently. Perhaps it was measured in small kindnesses between outcasts, in the shared understanding of those pushed to the margins. Perhaps, in this unforgiving land, the margins were the only place where someone like her could truly breathe free. Chapter 3. Desert Heart, ****. The desert at night was a different creature entirely from its daytime self, where the sun brought brutal clarity. Moonlight transformed the landscape into something almost dreamlike. Saguaro cacti stood like ancient sentinels, their arms raised in silent supplication to the stars. A coyote called somewhere in the distance, its voice carrying across the emptiness like a lost soul's lament. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter as they made camp near a cluster of ironwood trees. 3 days traveling with Nahuel had taught her new rhythms. Move during the cooler hours. Rest when the sun reached its zenith. Always watch for signs of water. He shared his knowledge sparingly but effectively, showing rather than telling. "See there," He pointed to a barely visible game trail. "Javelinas passed this morning. Where they go? Water is near." She was learning to read the desert's secret language. How barrel cacti always leaned south. How the presence of certain birds meant water within a mile. How to spot the difference between dust kicked up by wind and that raised by riders. "You know this land like you were born to it," Sarah observed, watching him construct a nearly smokeless fire from dried mesquite. "I was," Nahuel said simply. "My grandmother showed me these things when I was small. Before." He didn't finish, but Sarah had learned not to press. His silences held stories too painful for casual telling. That night, the temperature dropped sharply. Sarah woke shivering, her thin blanket inadequate against the desert's fickleness. She tried to be quiet, not wanting to seem weak, but Nahuel noticed anyway. "The desert tests everyone," he said, adding more wood to the fire. "It cares nothing for pride." They sat near the flames, close enough for warmth, but maintaining that careful distance that had become their unspoken rule. Sarah found herself studying his profile in the firelight. There was a steadiness to him that reminded her of the mountains themselves, enduring, unchangeable, carved by hardship but unbroken. "May I ask you something?" she ventured. He nodded, eyes still on the fire. "The sister you mentioned, what was her name?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Ayana, it means eternal blossom. His voice carried a weight of memory. "She was 15 summers when the soldiers came to move us to the reservation. She ran, He stopped, jaw tightening. Sarah waited, understanding that some stories needed their own time. "They caught her near Tucson, said she was hostile, dangerous, a girl who barely reached a soldier's shoulder." His laugh was bitter. "A rancher's wife found her afterward. Tried to help, but the damage was done. Ayana died in that woman's barn, calling for our mother." "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, the words pathetically inadequate. "The woman, Mrs. Rodriguez, she risked much to bring Ayana's body back to us for proper burial. My people wanted to raid in retaliation, but I remembered her kindness. It complicated things." Sarah understood. How did you reconcile kindness from one person with cruelty from their people? How did you navigate a world that demanded you choose sides when both had shown you their best and worst? The next day brought new challenges. Their water ran low faster than expected, and Moses began showing signs of heat distress. By afternoon, the mule was stumbling, foam flecking his mouth. "We must find water soon," Nahuel said, scanning the horizon with worried eyes. Sarah stroked Moses's neck, guilt eating at her. The faithful creature had carried her this far, and now... There! Nahuel pointed to a spot that looked no different from any other to Sarah's eyes. "Cottonwoods, maybe a half-mile. It might as well have been 100. Moses took 3 more steps and collapsed, sides heaving. "No, no, no." Sarah dropped to her knees beside him. "Come on, boy, just a little further." But Moses had given all he had. His breathing grew labored. Then still, Sarah pressed her face against his neck, tears coming hot and fast. It was just a mule, she told herself, just an animal. But he'd been her last link to her old life, the one constant in her world of upheaval. "Sarah," Nahuel's voice was gentle. "We must move. Take what you can carry. Leave the rest." She looked at her wagon, at the few possessions she'd managed to keep. Her mother's china, Thomas's books, the quilt her grandmother had made. How did you choose what parts of yourself to abandon? In the end, practicality won. She took clothes, the medicine kit, Thomas's pistol, and her grandmother's Bible. Not from faith, particularly, but because its pages held pressed flowers from her wedding and a photograph of her parents. Nahuel fashioned a carrying pack from canvas and helped her load what they could manage. They left the rest with Moses, a strange monument to one woman's journey from respectability to survival. The cottonwoods did hold water, a small spring bubbling up from red rocks. Sarah drank deeply, then sat in the shade, overwhelmed by loss and exhaustion. "I'm trapped," she said hollowly. "No wagon, no mule. I might as well have died back there with Moses." Nahuel was quiet for a moment, then said, "When I was 12, soldiers burned our village. Everything gone. Homes, food stores, sacred items centuries old. My grandfather said to me, 'They can take all we have, but they cannot take who we are. We carry our true selves here.'" He touched his chest. "And here, his temple." "Pretty words," Sarah said bitterly. "But words don't change facts. I'm a burden to you now. You should leave me at the next town. Let me figure out my own fate." "Is that what you think?" Nahuel turned to face her fully. "That you are burden?" "Aren't I? You could move twice as fast alone? You wouldn't have to worry about—" "I would worry," he interrupted, then seemed surprised by his own words. "That is, you are not burden. You are—" He struggled for words, and Sarah found herself holding her breath. "You are like ironwood," he finally said. "It grows slowly in harsh places. Settlers try to cut it, burn it, remove it because it is inconvenient to their purposes. But ironwood endures. Its roots go deep, and when it blooms—" He gestured to a nearby ironwood tree, its branches heavy with purple flowers. "The desert becomes beautiful." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a wall she'd built around her heart developing its first crack. "I don't feel very enduring right now." "No," Nahuel almost smiled. "You lost husband, home, family. You crossed dangerous territory alone. You faced men who would harm you. You lost your wagon and faithful animal. Yet you sit here, planning next move. This is not enduring." When he put it that way, Sarah managed a watery smile. "When you say it like that, I sound almost heroic." "Not almost." This time he did smile, and it transformed his face. "Come, we rest today. Travel tonight. The trading post is close now. On foot, 2 days maybe." That evening, as they prepared for the night journey, Sarah found herself watching Nahuel with new eyes. He moved through the familiar rituals of survival with a grace that spoke of complete harmony with his environment. Yet she sensed the deep loneliness in him, the weight of existing between worlds. "Nahuel," she called softly. He turned, moonlight catching the angles of his face. "Thank you for everything. I know I haven't been properly grateful." "Gratitude is not needed between—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Between friends." Friends. Such a simple word. Yet it held such weight here in this empty place where their usual worlds didn't reach. As they walked through the cooling desert, following paths only Nahuel could see, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not quite hope, that was too strong a word yet, but a possibility of hope. A sense that perhaps she wasn't meant to merely survive, but to transform, like the desert itself after rain. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent to human struggles. But beneath them, 2 outcasts moved through the darkness together, no longer quite so alone. Chapter 4. Fire Under the Night Sky, ****. The riders came at dusk on the second day, their dust cloud visible long before the thunder of hooves reached them. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the lead rider's pale eyes, the same man Nahuel had wounded days ago. Snake Eyes had found them, and this time he'd brought friends. 5 men, all armed, all with the hungry look of wolves who'd scented prey. "Into the rocks," Nahuel commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. "Now!" They scrambled up a narrow path between 2 red sandstone formations, Sarah's skirts catching on thorns and rough stone. Behind them, she could hear the riders shouting, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. There, the Apache and his woman. The possessive term made her stomach turn. But there was no time for indignation. Nahuel led her through a maze of stone, his knowledge of the terrain their only advantage. They emerged onto a high ledge just as the first shots rang out, bullets whining off the rocks like angry hornets. "Here." Nawel pressed Thomas's pistol into her hands. "You remember how to use this?" Sarah nodded, though her hands shook. Thomas had taught her to shoot bottles and cans, but never at people. "Stay low. Shoot only if they climb up." Nahuel was already moving, rifle in hand, using the rocks for cover as he worked to flank their attackers. The next hour felt like a lifetime. The bandits tried twice to climb up to their position, but the narrow approach worked in the defenders' favor. Nahuel's rifle cracked steadily, keeping them pinned down. Sarah fired once when a man's head appeared over the ledge, the pistol's kick nearly knocking her backward. She didn't know if she hit him, but he disappeared with a curse. As darkness fell, an uneasy standoff developed. The bandits couldn't reach them, but Sarah and Nahuel were trapped with limited water and ammunition. "They'll wait us out," Sarah whispered, her throat dry from fear and thirst. "No," Nahuel said quietly. "They are impatient men, and this land at night," he smiled grimly. "It has ways of testing courage." As if in answer, a mountain lion screamed somewhere in the darkness, a sound like a woman in agony that raised every hair on Sarah's body. She heard the horses below whinny in terror, men cursing as they fought to control them. "That cat's been following us since yesterday," Nahuel murmured, curious about the horses. 2 hours later, clouds rolled in, obscuring the moon and plunging the canyon into absolute darkness. Nahuel touched Sarah's shoulder. "We move now. Stay close. Do not speak." How he navigated in such darkness, she'd never know. They descended the opposite side of the rocks, every footstep careful, every breath measured. Sarah kept one hand on Nahuel's back, trusting him completely as they made their way through invisible dangers. They had almost reached the canyon floor when disaster struck. Sarah's foot found loose stones instead of solid ground. She fell hard, unable to stifle a cry of pain as her ankle twisted beneath her. There I heard them. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness like deadly fireflies. Nahuel hauled Sarah behind a boulder as bullets sparked off stone. "My ankle," she gasped. "I can't." "You can." His voice brooked no argument. "You must." He pulled her arm over his shoulder, half carrying her as they stumbled through the darkness. Behind them, the bandits crashed through the underbrush like mad bulls, shooting at shadows. They reached a narrow cleft in the rocks, barely wide enough for one person. Nahuel pushed Sarah inside, then squeezed in after her. The space was tight, forcing them close together. Sarah could feel his heart hammering against her back, matching the frantic pace of her own. The bandits passed within feet of their hiding spot, Snake Eye's voice carrying clearly. "Find them. That Apache knows I'll pay well for his scalp. And the woman." His laugh made Sarah press closer to Nahuel. "She'll fetch a good price in Mexico." They waited, hardly breathing, as the voices faded into distance. The storm that had been threatening finally broke, rain falling in sheets that would wash away their tracks but also soak them to the skin. "We need shelter," Nahuel said against her ear. "Can you walk?" Sarah tested her ankle. Pain shot through it, but she could bear weight. "I'll manage." They emerged from the cleft like drowned rats. The rain had turned the sandy wash into a rushing stream, and lightning illuminated the landscape in stark, terrifying glimpses. Nahuel found a shallow cave, really just an overhang of rock, but enough to escape the worst of the storm. Sarah collapsed against the back wall, shivering violently. Her ankle throbbed. Her clothes were soaked through, and reaction to the night's terror was setting in. She couldn't stop shaking. Nahuel gathered what dry wood he could find under the overhang and coaxed a small fire to life. "We risk them seeing the smoke," he said, "but cold will kill us as surely as bullets." He helped Sarah closer to the fire, his hands gentle but impersonal as he examined her ankle. "Twisted, not broken. It will heal." Sarah watched him work, noting new lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "You're hurt," she realized, seeing fresh blood on his sleeve. "A scratch from the rocks," he said dismissively. But when Sarah insisted on looking, she found a bullet graze along his forearm. They tended each other's wounds in silence, the intimacy of the moment not lost on either of them. When finished, they sat side by side, sharing the meager warmth of the fire. "I've brought you nothing but trouble," Sarah said quietly. "No," Nawel stared into the flames. "Those men would have hunted me anyway. I have history with them." Snake eyes. "His name is Josiah Bramwell. Last year, he and his men attacked a Mexican family traveling to California. I was guiding them." His voice went flat. "I saved the parents, but their daughter, she was 14. What they did before I could stop them." Sarah closed her eyes, understanding flooding through her. "So this isn't about me at all?" "It is now." Nawel turned to look at her, firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "He knows I care what happens to you. That makes you a target." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Sarah's breath caught. "You care?" Instead of answering directly, Nawel reached out to touch a strand of her wet hair. "You smiled in your sleep last night," he said softly, just a small smile, "like you were seeing something pleasant. It reminded me." He trailed off, hand dropping, but Sarah caught it. "Reminded you of what?" "Someone I knew, long ago." He squeezed her hand once, then let go. "We should sleep. Tomorrow will bring new challenges." But sleep wouldn't come for Sarah. She lay listening to the rain, hyper-aware of Nawel's presence beside her. He'd positioned himself between her and the cave entrance, rifle within reach, even now protecting her. In the dying firelight, she studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his shoulder, the careful way he held himself even in sleep. When had this strange, dangerous man become her anchor in the storm? Near dawn, fever took her. The combination of cold, wet, and stress overwhelmed her body's defenses. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of heat and cold warring within her, of voices that might have been real or imagined. She dreamed of wildflowers, fields of them stretching to the horizon, purple and gold and white. Someone was bringing them to her, armfuls of beauty in a harsh land. She tried to see who it was, but the figure remained just out of sight, leaving only the flowers and a sense of profound safety. "You smiled in your sleep," a voice said softly, pulling her partway back to consciousness. "Was I bringing you wildflowers again?" The words held such tenderness, such longing, that Sarah wanted to weep. She tried to answer, to say yes, you were, you are. But darkness claimed her again. When she finally woke fully, late afternoon sun slanted into the cave. Nawel sat beside her, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd kept vigil all night. A damp cloth lay across her forehead, and she realized he'd been tending her fever. "The riders?" she asked, voice raspy. "Gone for now. The storm washed away our trail." He helped her sit up, supporting her with surprising gentleness. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by wild horses," Sarah admitted. "But alive, thanks to you. We protect each other." Nawel said simply, "This is the way of survival." But Sarah saw in his eyes that it had become more than survival. Somewhere between that first meeting and this moment, they'd crossed an invisible line. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by something deeper, more dangerous than any external threat. Outside, the desert bloomed in the wake of the storm, cacti flowers opening to greet the sun. It was beautiful and treacherous, much like the feeling growing between them, a flower blooming in impossible ground, all the more precious for its improbability. Chapter 5. Under the blood-soaked sun. ****. The morning brought no relief. Sarah woke to Nawel's hand on her shoulder. his expression grim. Through the cave entrance, she could see dust rising in the distance, riders approaching fast. "They found us," she breathed. "Not found, waited." Nowell was already gathering their few supplies. "Bramwell knows this country. He guessed we would shelter here." They had minutes, maybe less. Sarah tested her ankle, still painful but functional. As they emerged from the cave, she saw their situation was worse than she'd imagined. The riders had split up, coming from 2 directions, cutting off escape routes. "The wash," Nowell said urgently, pointing to the narrow ravine carved by last night's storm. "If we can reach the old mine shaft." His words were cut off by gunfire. Bullets sparked off the rocks as they ran, Sarah's ankles screaming with each step. The wash provided some cover, its banks high enough to shield them, but it also trapped them in a predictable path. There, don't let them reach the mine. The abandoned shaft was visible ahead, a dark mouth in the hillside that promised shelter. 50 yards, 40, 30. A rider appeared on the bank above. Rifle aimed. Sarah saw it happen in slow motion, the man's finger tightening on the trigger. Nahuel pushing her aside, the crack of the shot. Nowell grunted and stumbled but kept moving, red spreading across his shirt. "No!" Sarah grabbed his arm, supporting him as they stumbled the last few yards to the mine entrance. The shaft was partially collapsed, timbers groaning ominously, but it was shelter. They plunged into the darkness as more shots rang out behind them. "How bad?" Sarah asked, trying to see Nahuel's wound in the dim light filtering from the entrance. "Keep moving," he gasped. "Deeper!" They felt their way along the tunnel, the air growing cooler and staler. Behind them, voices echoed. "They went in the mine." "Well, go after them." "Are you crazy? That shaft's been unstable for years." Sarah found a side passage and pulled Nowell into it. They crouched in the darkness, listening. After several minutes of argument, they heard Bramwell's voice, cold and decisive. "Fine, we wait. They'll have to come out eventually. Post men at both entrances." "Boss, what if there ain't another entrance?" "Then they die in there. Either way, problem solved." As the voices faded, Sarah turned her attention to Nahuel. By touch, she found where the bullet had entered his side, blood flowing steadily. "We need light," she muttered. "No, they will see." "You'll bleed to death in the dark," she snapped, fear making her voice sharp. "I didn't come this far to lose you now." She felt him go still. "Lose me?" Sarah's hands paused in their exploration of his wound. Even in the darkness, the weight of her words hung between them. We need to stop this bleeding." She tore strips from her petticoat, wadding them against the wound. Nowell's breathing was labored, each inhale pained. "There is another exit," he said finally. "Old ventilation shaft, but it is difficult." "Show me." They moved deeper into the mine, Nahuel leaning heavily on Sarah. The passages branched and twisted, a maze that would have been terrifying even without pursuit. At last, Nahuel stopped. "Up," he said, and Sarah's reaching hands found iron rungs bolted into the wall, leading up into blackness. "Can you climb?" "I must." It was a nightmare ascent. Sarah went first, testing each rung, terrified it would give way. Below her, she could hear Nahuel's labored breathing, the occasional grunt of pain. Once, his grip slipped, and only Sarah's quick grab kept him from falling. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, Sarah's head hit wood. She pushed, and a covering gave way, revealing blessed daylight. They emerged from the shaft onto a hillside scattered with mine tailings, perhaps a quarter-mile from where they'd entered. Nahuel collapsed immediately, his face gray with pain and blood loss. Sarah looked around desperately. Below, she could see Bramwell's men watching the main entrance. It was only a matter of time before they thought to search for other exits. Can you walk? Nahuel tried to rise, made it to his knees, then fell back. Go, he said. Trading post is northwest. 2 miles. Get help. I'm not leaving you. Sarah. No. The word came out fiercer than she intended. You don't get to save me and then give up. We survived together. Remember. She spotted a cluster of boulders upslope that might provide cover, half dragging, half carrying Nahuel. She got him behind the rocks. The position gave them a view of the approaches while hiding them from below. Sarah examined Nahuel's wound properly for the first time. The bullet had passed through his side, which was good, but it had done damage on its way. She used the last of their water to clean it, packed it with cloth torn from her dress, and bound it tightly. Your dress is becoming quite short, Nahuel observed weakly. A tempting humor. Hush! But Sarah felt a flutter of hope. If he could joke, perhaps. The sun climbed higher, baking the hillside. Sarah watched the men below, counting, 7 visible, which meant at least one was probably circling, looking for exactly what they'd done. Sarah! Nahuel's voice was urgent. In my pack, the small leather pouch. She found it. Inside was a mixture of dried plants that smelled sharp and medicinal. Chew this, make paste, for the wound. He guided her hands. Apache medicine. It will help fight the poison. As she worked, he talked, voice soft and sometimes wandering. He told her about his childhood, about learning to track before he could properly walk, about the first time he saw soldiers, how their blue uniforms had seemed like pieces of sky fallen to earth. I thought they were spirits, he murmured. How else could men capture the sky? Sarah realized he was trying to give her his stories, afraid he wouldn't get another chance. Save your strength, she told him. You can tell me later. You still trust there will be a later after all this? She met his eyes. Yes. A shout from below cut off any response. One of Bramwell's men was pointing up the hill. They'd been spotted. The pistol, Nahuel said. How many bullets? Sarah checked. 3. Not enough. He struggled to sit up. Help me to that ridge. We make our stand there. Stand. You can barely sit. Then I will lie down and shoot, but I will not let them take you. The determination in his voice broke something in Sarah. Why? She asked. Why does it matter so much what happens to me? Nahuel reached up, fingers brushing her cheek. Because you smiled in your sleep. Because you saw me as a man. Not Apache, not half-breed, just a man. Because in all this darkness, you are light. Sarah blinked back tears. This was not the time, not the place. But when was it ever, Nahuel? They're coming, he interrupted. Help me move. They made it to the ridge just as the first riders appeared below. Sarah helped Nahuel prop himself against a rock, rifle ready despite his shaking hands. When I start shooting, you run, he said, north to the trading post. I told you, I'm not leaving. Sarah, she pressed the pistol into his hand. Then I guess we'd better make these bullets count. The riders were climbing now, leaving their horses below. 6 men, armed and eager for blood. Sarah picked up rocks, pathetic weapons, but better than nothing. You should know, she said quietly. You made me smile too, even in sleep, even in darkness. You brought me wildflowers when I thought beauty had died from the world. Nahuel's hand found hers, squeezed once. Then it was worth it, all of it. The first man appeared over the rocks, and the world exploded into violence. Nahuel's first shot took him center mass. Sarah threw her rock with all her strength, catching another man in the face. He fell back with a curse. But there were too many. As Nahuel fired again, Sarah saw Bramwell himself circling around their flank, that pale-eyed snake moving to strike. Behind us, she shouted, but it was too late. Bramwell's rifle cracked. Nahuel jerked, red blooming across his chest. The rifle fell from his hands. "No," Sarah caught him as he slumped. "No, no, no!" Bramwell approached slowly, savoring his victory. "Well, well, the Apache finally falls. And you, Mrs. Whitfield, yes, I know who you are. Asked around, heard you were too good for honest work in town." Sarah held Nawell against her, feeling his blood soak through her dress. His eyes found hers, still aware, still fighting to stay. "Seems to me," Bramwell continued, "a woman who'd take up with a savage might not be too particular about other arrangements. What do you say, come willing like? And I might even get him to a doctor." Sarah looked at Bramwell's smirking face, at the other men closing in, at Nawell bleeding out in her arms. Something wild and fierce rose in her chest. Her hand found the dropped pistol. One bullet left. "I say." She raised the gun, voice steady as mountain stone. "Go to hell." The shot was perfect, taking Bramwell between those pale, cruel eyes. He toppled backward, the smirk finally gone. For a moment, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. The remaining men shouted, raised their weapons, and new gunfire cracked from the hillside above. Riders poured over the ridge, Mexican traders from the looks of them, firing rapidly. Bramwell's men scattered like quail, suddenly outnumbered. "Señora, señor," a familiar voice, Rodrigo, the trading post owner Nahuel had mentioned, rifle smoking. "We heard the shots. Are you Dios mío?" "Nahuel." Everything became a blur. Strong hands lifting Nahuel, urgent Spanish, Sarah refusing to let go of him even as they carried him to safety. Someone pressed water to her lips. Someone else was examining Nahuel's wounds, shaking their head gravely. "Please," Sarah begged. "Please save him. He's everything." The last thing she remembered was Nahuel's eyes finding hers, his lips moving. No sound came, but she read the words anyway. "Wildflowers. You were bringing me wildflowers." Then darkness claimed them both. Chapter 6, The Land of Whispers, ***. The town of Cedar Falls appeared like a mirage after 2 weeks of recovery at Rodrigo's trading post. Sarah sat beside Nahuel on the wagon seat, acutely aware of the stares that followed them down Main Street. A white woman traveling with an Apache. She might as well have painted scandal across her forehead. Nahuel's wounds had healed enough for travel, though he still moved carefully. The Mexican traders had saved both their lives, but Sarah knew the real battle was just beginning. They needed supplies, work, a place to rest properly, and Cedar Falls was the only town within 50 miles. "We don't have to stay," Nahuel said quietly, reading her tension. "Yes, we do." Sarah kept her chin high despite the whispers that followed them like dust devils. "You need medical supplies I can't get at a trading post, and I need work if we're going to survive." They stopped at Miller's General Store. The proprietor, a thin man with suspicious eyes, watched them approach like they were rattlesnakes. "Help you," his tone suggested he'd rather do anything but. "Medical supplies," Sarah said firmly. "Carbolic acid, clean bandages, laudanum for pain." Miller's eyes shifted to Nahuel, took in his Apache features, the way he stood protective despite his injuries. "We don't serve Indians here." "Then serve me," Sarah said. "I have money." "Do you now?" A woman emerged from behind the counter, Mrs. Miller, presumably, her face pinched with disapproval. "And where does a woman traveling with a savage get money?" Sarah felt Nahuel tense beside her, but placed a calming hand on his arm. "From honest work, which is what I'm seeking here. Now, will you sell me supplies, or shall I take my business elsewhere?" The threat was empty. There was no elsewhere. But the mention of money softened Miller's expression slightly. Business was business, after all. As Sarah completed her purchases, she became aware of a growing crowd outside. By the time they emerged, half the town seemed to have gathered. Among them stood a woman in severe black, Mrs. Constance Weatherby, the minister's wife and self-appointed guardian of Cedar Falls morality. You, her voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. You're the Whitfield widow from Bisbee. We heard about you. Sarah's heart sank. News traveled fast in the territories. Taking up with an Apache. Mrs. Weatherby's lip curled. Have you no shame, no thought for your immortal soul? I think of little else. Sarah replied evenly, which is why I choose kindness over cruelty, friendship over fear. Friendship. The woman laughed harshly. Is that what you call it? And what of your husband's memory? What of your family's good name? My husband is dead, Sarah said, surprising herself with her calm. His family cast me out. As for my name, I'd rather be called shameful for choosing compassion than respectable for choosing hate. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some faces showed sympathy, others disgust. The church is no place for Indian lovers, Mrs. Weatherby declared, nor is any decent establishment. You'll find no welcome here. Then I'll make my own welcome. Sarah shot back. As I've been doing. She turned to go, but a man stepped forward, younger, with the soft look of someone who'd never missed a meal. Now hold on, he said, false friendliness in his voice. No need for such hostility. I'm Theodore Blackwood, owner of the Silver Dollar Saloon. I might have work for a woman of your flexibility. The implication in his tone was clear. Several men snickered. The lady said she seeks honest work. Nawell spoke for the first time, his voice dangerously quiet. Blackwood's eyes hardened. I wasn't talking to you, Indian. But you were talking about her. Nawell stepped forward despite Sarah's restraining hand. Show respect. Or what? Blackwood's hand moved toward his gun. You'll scalp me. The crowd pressed closer. Ugly mood building. Sarah's mind raced. One wrong move and they'd have a mob on their hands. Mr. Blackwood, she said loudly. I appreciate your offer, but I have standards. I don't work for men who insult my friends or threaten violence against wounded men. Wounded, someone in the crowd called out. He looks healthy enough to cause trouble. He was shot defending me from bandits, Sarah announced. The same bandits who've been terrorizing travelers for months. Josiah Bramwell and his gang. Perhaps you've heard of them. That got attention. Bramwell's name was known and feared throughout the territory. You're saying this Apache killed Bramwell? Sheriff Watson pushed through the crowd, badge glinting. I killed Bramwell, Sarah said clearly. Put a bullet between his eyes when he tried to take me to Mexico. Nawell here was already shot twice trying to protect me. Silence fell. The crowd stared at this small woman who spoke so matter-of-factly about killing one of the territory's most wanted men. That's quite a claim, the sheriff said slowly. Check with Rodrigo's trading post, Sarah said. His men witnessed the fight, helped drive off the rest of Bramwell's gang. They'll confirm everything. Sheriff Watson studied them both, then nodded slowly. I'll do that. In the meantime, he looked around at the crowd. Seems to me folks who rid us of Bramwell deserve thanks, not harassment. They deserve Christian charity, a new voice said. Sarah turned to see a young woman in a simple gray dress pushing forward. I'm Margaret O'Brien. I run the boarding house on 2nd Street. I have a room if you need it. Mrs. Weatherby turned on her. Margaret, you'd harbor these. Christians, Margaret suggested mildly. People in need, yes, Mrs. Weatherby. I would, just as our Lord commanded. The Apache can sleep in the stable, someone suggested. He stays with me, Sarah said firmly. We're partners. Where I go, he goes. The crowd rustled with shock. Even Margaret looked uncertain. Perhaps. Nawell began. No. Sarah turned to face him. I'm tired of their conditions, their separation. We stand together or not at all. Something shifted in Nawell's eyes. Surprise, respect, and something deeper. He nodded once. Then I'm afraid I can't help you, Margaret said sadly. The other boarders would leave, Sarah finished. I understand. They turned to go, but another voice stopped them. Wait! An elderly Mexican woman stepped forward. Senora Vasquez, who ran the laundry at the edge of town where decent folk rarely ventured. I have room above my shop, she said in accented English. Is not fancy, but is clean, and I need help with the washing. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Senora, Bah! The woman waved her hand. I know what it is to be outsider. Come, we discuss terms. As they followed Senora Vasquez, the crowd parted reluctantly. Sarah heard the whispers resume. Shameful. Living in sin. What can you expect from a barren woman? That Apache will murder them all in their sleep. But she also caught other whispers. Killed Bramwell herself. Maybe we judge too quickly. Takes courage. That night, in the small but clean room above the laundry, Sarah and Nawel sat by the window watching the town settle into evening. They'd maintained careful distance all day, aware of watching eyes, but now, alone. The space between them felt charged with unspoken words. You didn't have to do that, Nawel said finally. Stand with me so publicly. Yes, I did. Sarah turned to face him. I'm tired of their world where caring for someone is shameful if they're the wrong color, where kindness is sin and cruelty is righteousness. You will lose everything, he warned. Already they call you terrible names. Sarah laughed, surprising them both. What, everything I've already lost all that world values? Husband, home, family approval? I'm a barren widow with no prospects. By their standards, I'm already ruined. You are not ruined, Nawel said fiercely. You are the strongest woman I know. Then why do you keep trying to leave to protect my reputation? Sarah stood, pacing to the other window. What reputation? The only good thing in my life these past weeks has been you. Your friendship, your protection, your... She stopped, unable to voice what his presence had come to mean. Sarah. He was behind her now. Close, but not touching. In my world, too. This is complicated. Some of my people would say I betray our blood by caring for a white woman. Then both our peoples are fools, Sarah said softly. Yes, he agreed. But we must live among fools. They stood in silence, watching stars appear over the desert. Finally, Nawel spoke again. That woman, Margaret, she meant well. Tomorrow, you could accept her offer. Distance yourself from me. In time, they might accept... Sarah turned and placed her fingers over his lips, stopping the words. No more noble sacrifices. No more pushing me away from my own good. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what partners do. Nawel caught her hand, held it against his cheek. Partners, he repeated, the word carrying weight beyond its simple meaning. Partners. Sarah confirmed. And in that moment, in a room above a laundry at the edge of town, two outcasts chose each other over the approval of a world that had no place for them anyway. Outside, Cedar Falls slept fitfully, full of righteous indignation and scandalized whispers. But in their small sanctuary, Sarah and Nawel had found something worth more than respectability. They'd found home in each other, even if the rest of the world would never understand. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be more towns, more judgment, more choices between safety and truth. But tonight, they had shelter, work, and most importantly, they had each other. And that, Sarah thought as she watched stars wheel overhead, was worth all the whispers in the world. Chapter 7. Stray Bullets and Wildflowers, ****. The morning started like any other in Cedar Falls. Sarah working beside Senora Vasquez in the laundry. Nawel helping with deliveries and heavy lifting despite the townspeople's suspicious glances. 6 weeks had passed since their arrival, And while they hadn't found acceptance, they'd carved out a small space of belonging. Then the thunder of hooves shattered the peace. "Bramwell's boys," someone shouted from Main Street. "They're back for revenge." Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd known this day would come. Killing Bramwell had cut the head off the snake, but the body still writhed. Now his remaining gang had come to collect their pound of flesh. Through the window, she saw them, 8 riders, faces covered with bandanas, guns already drawn. They moved with purpose, heading straight for the laundry. "They know we're here," Nahuel said grimly, reaching for his rifle. "The back door," Senora Vasquez urged. "Go, I'll tell them you left town." But it was too late. The lead rider, a man Sarah recognized as Jake Morrison, Bramwell's second, was already dismounting. "Sarah Whitfield," his voice carried clearly. "You and that Apache have debts to pay. Come out, or we start burning buildings." "No," Sarah said firmly. "No more running, no more innocent people hurt because of us." She started for the door, but Nahuel caught her arm. "Together," he said simply. They emerged into the bright morning sun. Nahuel's rifle held loosely but ready. The street had cleared, townspeople peering from windows and doorways. "Well, well," Morrison drawled. "The widow and her pet Indian. You cost us a good leader, woman. Time to settle accounts." "Your leader was scum," Sarah said clearly. "And you're no better, threatening innocent people." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Innocent? In a town that harbors killers. The only killers I see." Sheriff Watson stepped out from the jail, shotgun in hand. "Are the ones disturbing my town's peace." Sarah felt a flicker of hope, but Morrison just laughed. 8 of us, 1 of you, Sheriff. You really want to die for an Indian lover and her buck?" Watson hesitated, and Sarah saw the calculation in his eyes. The law was one thing, but dying for outcasts was another. "I'll make this simple," Morrison continued. "Hand them over, and we ride on. Refuse, and this whole town burns. Your choice. Sheriff." The silence stretched taut. Sarah could feel the town's judgment weighing on them. Would Cedar Falls protect them or sacrifice them for peace? "You want us," Nahuel stepped forward. "Then take us, but leave the town out of it." "No," Sarah moved with him. "You don't make deals for both of us." "Actually," Morrison grinned, "I'll make whatever deals I want. Boys, take them both. We'll have us some fun before—" The shot came from above, Senora Vasquez in her window with an old cavalry carbine. Morrison's hat flew off, and he dove for cover. "Stupid old woman." One of the gang members raised his pistol toward her window. Everything happened at once. Nahuel's rifle cracked, dropping the man who'd threatened Senora. Sarah drew Thomas's pistol from her skirt, she'd taken to carrying it always, and fired at another rider. Then the street exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Not just the gang, townspeople were shooting too. Margaret O'Brien appeared in her boarding house doorway with a scattergun. The blacksmith, Jonas Holly, fired from behind his anvil. Even some who'd shunned them were now defending their town. Sarah and Nahuel dove behind a water trough as bullets whined overhead. The woods splintered around them, but it was better than nothing. "The stable!" Nahuel shouted over the gunfire. "Better cover." They ran, Sarah's skirts tangling, Nahuel turning to fire behind them. A bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He kept his feet, but blood soaked his shirt. "No," Sarah got under his good arm, half dragging him to the stable. They crashed through the doors into dim safety. "How bad?" she asked, already tearing at his shirt. "I've had worse," but his face was gray with pain. Outside, the battle raged. Sheriff Watson's voice rose above the din, calling for surrender. More townspeople had joined the fight, apparently deciding that whatever their feelings about Sarah and Nahuel, they wouldn't be dictated to by outlaws. "We need to help them." Nahuel struggled to rise. We need to keep you from bleeding out, Sarah countered, packing the wound. The bullet had passed through cleanly, but he was losing blood fast. A figure burst through the stable doors. Morrison, blood streaming from a scalp wound, eyes wild with rage. Found you! Sarah's pistol was empty. Morrison raised his gun, aimed at Nawel. Sarah didn't think. She threw herself forward, between the gun and Nawel. The world exploded in pain and sound. She felt herself falling, felt Nahuel catch her, heard him roar with anguish. Through blurring vision, she saw Morrison step closer, gun still raised. Then his chest bloomed red. He looked down in surprise before toppling forward. Behind him stood Margaret O'Brien, smoking scattergun in her hands, face pale but determined. "Get the doctor!" Margaret screamed. "Someone get Dr. Phillips!" Sarah tried to speak, to say she was fine, but only blood came out. She could feel it spreading beneath her, warm and terrifyingly fast. Nawel's face appeared above her, twisted with grief. "No," he whispered. "No, you can't. Sarah, please." She wanted to comfort him, to say it didn't hurt, though it did. Terribly. Her hand found his face, traced the strong line of his jaw. So many words unsaid, so much time wasted on propriety and fear. "Wildflowers," she managed, smiling despite the pain. "You were right about the wildflowers." "Don't talk." Nawel pressed his hands against her wound, trying to stem the flow. "Save your strength. The doctor's coming." Around them, she was dimly aware of activity. The gunfire had stopped. People were shouting, running, but all that mattered was Nahuel's face, the tears cutting tracks through the dust on his cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me I could bloom, even in the desert." "You're not dying," he said fiercely. "I won't let you. We have plans. Remember the cabin by the stream, the life we're going to build?" Sarah wanted to answer, but darkness was creeping in from the edges. She'd always thought death would be frightening, but it wasn't. Not with Nahuel holding her, whispering words in Apache she didn't understand but felt in her soul. Dr. Phillips arrived, shoving everyone aside. Sarah caught fragments. Serious but not hopeless. Need to operate. Lost too much blood. But the words seemed to come from very far away. "Fight," Nahuel commanded, his voice breaking. "Fight for us, Sarah, for the future we deserve." And because he asked, because she'd found something worth living for in this harsh land, Sarah fought. She clung to consciousness as they carried her to the doctor's office, as Phillips worked with steady hands to repair the damage, as the town that had shunned her now prayed for her survival. The last thing she saw before the laudanum took her under was Nahuel's face, fierce with determination. The last thing she heard was his promise. "I'll be here when you wake, always." Time became fluid. Sarah drifted between darkness and dreams, between pain and peace. Sometimes she heard voices, Senora Vasquez praying in Spanish, Margaret reading from the Bible, Nahuel singing softly in Apache. Once she thought she heard Mrs. Weatherby, voice thick with tears, saying something about being wrong, about courage taking many forms. In her dreams, she walked through fields of wildflowers with Nahuel. They stretched endlessly under a perfect blue sky, every color imaginable, beauty growing from barren ground. He held her hand, and she knew with dream certainty that this was their future. Not easy, not without thorns, but beautiful beyond measure. When Sarah finally woke properly, sunset was painting the doctor's office in shades of gold and red. Nahuel sat beside her bed, his own shoulder bandaged, looking haggard but alert. "Water," she croaked. He practically flew to get it, supporting her carefully as she sipped. "Easy. Phillips says you need to stay still. The bullet did damage, but nothing that won't heal with time and care." The town, the gang. Gone, those who survived. Anyway, his expression darkened. The town fought for us. Sarah, even those who spoke against us. When Morrison threatened to burn everything, they remembered that we're part of Cedar Falls now, like it or not. Sarah processed this slowly. And now, Nahuel took her hand, careful of the bandages. Now you heal, and we decide what comes next. Together. Together, Sarah agreed, then winced. Though perhaps with fewer bullets in the future. I make no promises, Nahuel said with a slight smile. You seem to attract trouble like flowers attract bees. Speaking of flowers, Sarah squeezed his hand weakly. Was I really bringing you wildflowers in my sleep all those weeks ago? Nahuel's expression softened. No, but in my dreams, you were, every night since I met you, fields of them, impossibly beautiful in this harsh land, like you. Despite everything, the pain, the uncertainty, the long recovery ahead, Sarah felt hope bloom in her chest. They'd faced the worst together and survived. Whatever came next, they'd handle it the same way. I love you, she said simply, too tired and too grateful to be alive for propriety. I should have said it before. Should have. Shh. Nahuel leaned down, pressed his lips gently to her forehead. We have time now. All the time we need. Outside, Cedar Falls was rebuilding, reconsidering, perhaps even learning that judgment and righteousness weren't always the same thing. Inside, two people who'd found each other against all odds held hands and watched the stars appear. No longer outcasts, but partners in the truest sense. And somewhere in the desert, wildflowers bloomed in impossible places. Proof that beauty could grow anywhere love was brave enough to put down roots. Chapter 8. When the Sky Falls, Silent ***. 6 months had passed since the shootout that nearly claimed Sarah's life. The scar on her side still ached when storms rolled in, but she'd learned to read it like the desert learned to read the sky, as a sign of change coming, not always unwelcome. She stood now at the edge of their property, 5 acres along Willow Creek that Nahuel had purchased with gold from a claim he'd kept secret all these years. The cabin was small but solid, built with his hands and her determination. Around it, against all logic, a garden grew, corn and beans in the Apache way, mixed with the hardy vegetables she'd coaxed from the reluctant soil. You're thinking too hard again, Nahuel said, approaching from the creek where he'd been watering the horses. His shoulders still troubled him on cold mornings, but like her, he bore his scars without complaint. Just wondering at it all, Sarah admitted, 6 months ago, I was dying on a stable floor. Now look at us. Now look at us, he repeated, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. They stood together, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. The transformation hadn't been easy. Recovery took months, not just from the physical wounds, but from the deeper scars of all they'd endured. There were nights when Sarah woke gasping, feeling phantom blood on her hands. Times when Nahuel went silent for days, wrestling with memories of violence and loss. But they'd healed together, as they did everything now. The town had changed too. The shootout had forced Cedar Falls to examine itself, to question whether their prejudices were worth dying for. Some hearts remained closed. Mrs. Weatherby still crossed the street when she saw them coming, but others had opened in surprising ways. Margaret O'Brien visited regularly, bringing books and news. Sheriff Watson nodded respectfully when they came to town for supplies. Even some of the miners had started hiring Nahuel as a guide, recognizing his knowledge was worth more than their bias. "Letter came while you were in the garden," Nahuel said, producing an envelope from his pocket. Sarah recognized the handwriting immediately. Her sister-in-law, Elizabeth, the only Whitfield who'd shown her kindness. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "Dear Sarah," she read aloud. "Word has reached us of your circumstances. Mother Whitfield is scandalized, of course, but I wanted you to know that I understand. Love comes in forms we don't expect. Thomas would want you happy. I think, if you ever come east, you'll have welcome in my home. Your sister in spirit, if not in law. Elizabeth. Sarah blinked back tears. After years of rejection, even this small acceptance felt monumental. Will you go? Nawel asked carefully. Go! Sarah turned in his arms, studying his face. Leave all this leave you. She offers what I cannot, he said quietly. Respectability, a return to your world. Sarah reached up, framing his face with her hands. My world is where you are. When will you understand that? He caught her hands, holding them against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. The world will always be difficult for us. There will always be those who see our love as wrong. Then they're blind, Sarah said fiercely. Because I've never seen more clearly than when I look at you. They were interrupted by hoofbeats. Jonas Holly, the blacksmith, riding hard toward their cabin. Sarah tensed, old fears rising. But Jonas was grinning. Nawel misses. Whitfield. He reined up, dust swirling. Wanted to be the first to tell you. Town council met last night. They're offering you the sheriff's deputy position. Nawel. Watson says he needs someone who knows the territory. Can track, speaks Apache and Spanish. Says you're the best man for it. Sarah felt Nawel go still beside her. A lawman's position. Recognition. Acceptance. A place in the community they'd fought so hard to find. They know what I am, Nawel said slowly. They know who you are. Jonas corrected. Man who protected the town, man who stands by his word, the rest, he shrugged. Watson says any fool can see character matters more than color. After Jonas left with Nahuel's promise to consider, they walked to their favorite spot, a rise that overlooked the valley. Wildflowers grew here in profusion, as if the desert had saved all its beauty for this one place. Deputy Sheriff Nawel, Sarah said, trying out the words. It has a nice sound. It would mean staying, Nawel pointed out. No more wandering, no more freedom to leave when things get difficult. Things are always difficult, Sarah said pragmatically. At least here, we have friends, support, a chance to build something lasting. A home, Nawel said softly. We already have that, Sarah corrected, taking his hand. What we'd be building is a future. They sat among the wildflowers, planning. If Nahuel took the position, they could expand the cabin, maybe add a room for... Sarah stopped that thought, but Nahuel caught her hesitation. What? Nothing. Foolish dreams. Tell me, Sarah sighed. The doctor says the shooting, the damage, it's unlikely I'll ever have children. Another way I failed as a woman, I suppose. Nahuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, my people believe family is more than blood. It's choice, commitment, shared purpose. We are family, you and I, complete as we are. But you'd want. I want you. He interrupted. Healthy, happy, here. If children come, they'll be welcomed. If not, we're enough. More than enough. Sarah leaned into him, watching the sun set over their land. When did you become so wise? When a stubborn white woman refused to let me die in peace, he said with a slight smile. She insisted we both live instead. Very inconvenient. The most inconvenient thing I ever did, Sarah agreed. And the best. As stars emerged overhead, they made their way back to the cabin. Tomorrow, Nahuel would accept the deputy position. There would be challenges. Those who resented an Apache wearing a badge. Those who still whispered about their relationship. But they'd face them as they'd faced everything else. Together. Inside their home. Sarah lit the lamps while Nahuel built up the fire. Simple domestic tasks that held profound meaning for two people who'd almost lost everything. Sarah, Nahuel said suddenly. That first night, when you asked why I helped you, you said someone helped your sister. Sarah remembered. That was true, but not the whole truth. He turned from the fire, face serious. I helped because when I saw you there, alone and afraid but still fighting, I recognized something. A strength that wouldn't break, just bend until it found new shape, like the wildflowers that grow in rock crevices. Impossible, but there anyway. And now, Sarah asked softly, now I know I was right. You bloomed. Sarah, in the harshest ground, you bloomed. We bloomed, she corrected, crossing to him. Neither of us would have survived alone. No, he agreed, pulling her close. We needed each other. Need each other still. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, that wild sound that had once frightened Sarah but now seemed like home. The desert night wrapped around their cabin, vast and full of dangers. But they were no longer afraid. They'd found something worth fighting for, worth living for, worth building a future on. You know what I realized? Sarah said against his chest. You were wrong that night in the cave. Oh. You said I smiled in my sleep, asked if you were bringing me wildflowers again. But you had it backward. She pulled back to look at him. I wasn't receiving them. I was bringing them to you. Every dream, every smile. I was bringing you all the beauty I could find, storing it up for when we'd meet. Nahuel's eyes suspiciously bright. Sarah. We were always meant to find each other, she continued. Two people pushed to the margins, written off by the world, but margins are where wildflowers grow best, at the edges, in the forgotten spaces, wherever there's just enough hope for roots to take hold. He kissed her then, and it tasted like promise. Like tomorrow, like 1,000 small rebellions against a world that said they shouldn't exist. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. So what now, Mrs. Whitfield? Nahuel asked. Now, Deputy Nahuel, Sarah said with a grin. We live, boldly, honestly, without apology. We make this desert bloom with so much love that even the stones will have to admit beauty can grow anywhere. Even in the harshest ground. Especially there, Sarah confirmed. That's where it means the most. They stood in their doorway, looking out at the star-filled sky, the vast desert, the endless possibilities of tomorrow. Two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen love over safety, truth over acceptance, each other over everything else. And in the garden, defying nature and logic, the wildflowers bloomed on, proof that some things were stronger than the forces that tried to destroy them. Proof that love, like desert flowers, found a way to survive and thrive in even the most unlikely ground. The desert sang its night song around them, wind through canyon walls, distant owls, the rustle of small lives pursuing ancient patterns. Sarah and Nahuel added their own music to it, laughter, whispered plans, the quiet breathing of two souls finally at rest. They'd traveled far to reach this moment, through violence and prejudice, through their own fears and the world's judgment, but they'd made it, and the journey had transformed them both into something stronger, more beautiful than either could have been alone. In the morning, there would be new challenges, but tonight there was peace and love, and the absolute certainty that whatever came, they would face it as they'd learned to face everything, hand in hand, heart to heart, rooted deep in the wild, impossible ground of their choosing. The wildflowers nodded in the night breeze, as if in agreement, and Sarah smiled in her sleep, bringing Nahuel flowers in her dreams. Thank you so much for listening to our story of love blooming in the impossible ground of the Wild West. I hope Sarah and Nahuel's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening to this story. I'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with fellow lovers of Western romance. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, courage, and the human spirit triumphing against all odds. Until next time, partners.